Welcome to the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, or IDDSI 201 for healthcare professionals. My name is Carrie, and I am a volunteer for the United States IDDSI Reference Group, or USIRG. You learned about the basics of IDDSI in the 101 webinar. If you are completely new to IDDSI, we suggest that you watch the 101 webinar first. This 201 webinar will teach the IDDSI food and liquid testing methods. It is important to use both the IDDSI framework with its detailed descriptions and these IDDSI testing methods. The learning objectives for today are to become familiar with all of the IDDSI testing methods, which allow you to successfully test any food or liquid in your facility and classify its IDDSI level. We will also think about how foods behave and how to fix an item that does not meet the testing requirements. Most of the testing methods use common kitchen tools like forks and spoons. At the end of the webinar, we will provide you with many IDDSI resources. The webinar will cover these 7 testing methods utilized across the IDDSI levels. We will start with talking about choking risk reduction with food size assessments and particle size requirements. Then we will talk about textures, specifically what is soft and moist. We will cover the spoon tilt test, fork pressure test, fork-spoon separation test, and specific testing for transitional food textures. For liquids or drink testing, we will teach IDDSI's flow test for liquid levels 1, 2, and 3. The fork drip test is good for levels 3 and 4. It is also a great food test for puree level 4 and minced and moist level 5. Please note, we will present testing with typical items available in kitchens in the United States, but you can substitute other tools such as chopsticks or fingers for many of these tests. More examples of testing modifications can be found on the IDDSI YouTube channel. The IDDSI framework and all of these testing methods are available on IDDSI.org. We suggest that you print out this framework to refer to it throughout this webinar. Let's review each level first. Level 7, regular, which is black. Level 7, also easy to chew, which is black. Level 6, soft and bite-sized in blue. Level 5, minced and moist in orange. Level 4, pureed or extremely thick in green. Level 3, liquidized and moderately thick in yellow. Level 2, mildly thick in pink. Level 1, slightly thick in gray. And level 0, thin in white. Today, we will be discussing testing methods for all of these levels. Also for review, consider downloading the IDDSI framework and detailed definitions and testing methods documents. In general, it is helpful to print out posters and other resources for your reference and learning. If you want to test foods and drinks along with this video, pause the video on the next slide to prepare your testing materials. Here is a complete list of testing materials to get you ready for any IDDSI testing method. You can pause the webinar to note these items. Because everyone has a different definition of thick, soft, and small, IDDSI provides a standardized way to measure these food and liquid descriptions objectively. IDDSI uses objective, inexpensive, and reliable testing methods that can be used on all foods around the world. Testing methods are based on best available evidence, practical and portable for use across all cultures, reliable and improve accuracy. Testing is to ensure the food texture or drink consistency at meals and snacks correlate with the recommendations of a qualified clinician and the doctor's orders. The first food characteristic that we will discuss is size. This is so important for patient safety to reduce the risk of choking. The photo that you see here is of an X-ray swallow study where a chunk of bread is lodged in the voice box, which is at the top of the airway. They will choke on bread if they cannot cough it out. IDDSI measures bite sizes that fall through the top of the airway rather than blocking it completely like this. The soft and bite-sized level 6 food size restriction is 1.5 by 1.5 centimeters and is so important for patient safety. This is the size of a piece of food that could fall through the airway but not block it, which causes choking. Imagine having a beef stew with potatoes and other vegetables. Now remove a small portion of the meat, potato, and other vegetables for sample testing to check sizes. Of course, it is not recommended to serve a testing sample. IDDSI is an international organization and lists these sizes in millimeters and centimeters. 1.5 centimeters is roughly 0.5 to 0.6 inches, but we strongly recommend staying with the centimeter measurements. If there are no rulers in the kitchen, you can also use the width of a standard dinner fork, or the adult thumbnail, which is also 1.5 centimeters. This makes a great tool for the person with dysphagia to use at home. They can cut up foods to the size of their thumbnail to know that the food will be small enough to not completely block the upper airway and cause choking, which is also known as asphyxiation. The second method to test size with the particle requirements for minced and moist, level 5. Adults typically chew food down to roughly 4 millimeters or less to make the food swallow ready. Some people cannot break foods down with chewing into small particles that are safer to swallow. A diet can be provided that is ground or minced to particle sizes of 2 millimeters for pediatrics and 4 millimeters for adults. A standard fork can be used to measure the 4 millimeter particle size. Properly processed food fits between the tines of a fork. Food is three-dimensional. Particle sizes for minced and moist for adults should be 4 by 4 millimeters and no longer than 15 millimeters. And for pediatrics, it should be 2 by 2 millimeters and no longer than 8 millimeters. Most processed foods will be more uniform in all three dimensions. Keep in mind that when you increase the surface area on a piece of food, it will dry out faster. This diet must also have the moisture and cohesion to be considered minced and moist. That may require new recipes. Simply adding gravy to a plate of crumbly food is not safe. Because children grow and develop at different rates, consultation and clinical judgment should be used to guide decision-making for when to transition from pediatric to adult sizing. See the pediatric and adult tracheal diameter ranges on the right side of the slide. We are now moving to the topic of soft, as well as when a food is smooth and moist enough to easily swallow. IDDSI's spoon tilt test is very important to make sure a food is not too dry and sticky. Some people with dysphagia have difficulty moving foods through their mouth, throat, and food tube or esophagus without getting food stuck or leaving residue after they swallowed. The tool used is a spoon. Scoop up the sample of extremely thick liquid or food, such as minced and moist or pureed, and evaluate how it slides off or does not slide off the spoon. Notice in this picture the pureed peas are sticking to the spoon. They become stickier when they are cooled down. Now notice in the picture on the right that the puree has passed the spoon tilt test, leaving very little left on the spoon. Purees may be smoother when they are served warm. The spoon tilt test tests a sample for cohesiveness, the ability to hold together, but not stickiness. The spoonful must plop or slide off the spoon if the spoon is tilted or turned sideways, with very little left on the spoon. Using a very gentle flick, using only fingers and wrist and not the arm, may be necessary to dislodge the sample from the spoon. The spoonful may spread or slump very slightly on a plate. Food and liquid should be moist and cohesive enough to hold its shape on the spoon, but it should not be too sticky. Let's review the spoon tilt test because it is so important. An individual with dysphagia may have difficulty controlling and shaping food into a ball in the mouth. They may lack saliva to make sure the ball of food is moist enough to swallow. Foods need to be slippery, moist, and cohesive. The spoon tilt test measures this for extremely thick and pureed, level 4, and minced and moist, level 5. See the top line here of vanilla pudding that slides off the spoon with very little left over in the bowl of the spoon. The spoon tilt test gives us an objective way to determine if the food is too sticky, like the butterscotch pudding here in the bottom line of photos. A spoonful of food should be able to slide off easily when the spoon is tilted. You can give it just a gentle flick of the finger or wrist, but the amount of butterscotch pudding left here in the spoon is a fail for this spoon tilt test. For minced and moist, a spoonful that is dry and crumbly may fall off of the spoon, but it should be moist and cohesive enough to hold together in a mound on a spoon and slide off. Here is a video showing this for level 4. You can see the effort they had to use at the end of the video. Now let's learn about the fork pressure test. The tools needed are a fork. A spoon can also be used, but it is not recommended. Evaluate the firmness of the food sample by observing the reaction of a sample to the pressure from a fork. Evaluate how hard you are pushing on the fork by if your thumbnail blanches white. As you can see in the picture, you separate a sample of the food and press a fork into it. It turns out that approximately 17 kilopascals of pressure is needed to achieve this blanching of the thumbnail. And interestingly, this is similar to the amount of pressure that is used by the tongue to squash and strip foods out of the mouth when we swallow. The fork pressure test steps are listed here. Use your thumb to press into the bowl of a fork. Press into a bite-sized piece of food until your thumbnail turns white. The sample squashes easily, breaks apart, changes shape, and does not return to its original shape when the fork is removed. You may see lasting fork marks in the sample, but the food does not stick to the fork. The fork pressure test is used for all of these levels, but please note that the result is different for level 5, minced and moist. A minced and moist piece of food should be so tender that you don't need to use a lot of pressure when pushing down with the fork. Your thumbnail will not blanch white with the minced and moist level 5 texture. But for the soft and bite-sized level 6, you are using enough pressure on the fork to make the thumbnail blanch white. You also use enough pressure to make your thumbnail blanch white when testing easy to chew level 7 and a transitional food sample. Let's take a look at a video that demonstrates the fork pressure test using cooked broccoli. This shows great examples of how a chopstick or fingers can also be used for the same type of pressure test. Now let's learn about the fork-spoon separation test. The tools needed are a fork or a spoon. Evaluate if the food is soft enough to be separated into smaller pieces. Define if the food is soft enough for easy oral processing. This test is used for easy to chew level 7 and soft and bite-sized level 6. For the fork-spoon separation test, you must be able to break food apart easily with the side of a fork or spoon. I'm going to do this one again. For the fork-spoon separation test, you must be able to break food apart easily with the side of a fork or spoon. Now we will address how to test transitional foods. But first, what are transitional foods? They are foods or items like ice chips that start as one texture, such as firm or solid, but they change into another texture, specifically when moisture, like water or saliva, is applied, or when a change in temperature occurs, such as heating in the mouth. See the transitional food labels in the sidebar in the IDDSI pyramid. Transitional food items may be ice chips, popsicles, ice cream, baby teething wafers, or first finger foods, and products from companies that make dissolvable crisps. Transitional items do not require biting, and minimal chewing is required. The tongue easily mashes foods once altered by saliva and temperature. Only simple tongue pressure is needed, and there is no size restriction. The endpoint texture occurs after the transition. That endpoint texture determines the appropriate texture for a person. Does the item transition to a smooth puree, like baby teething wafers, or does it melt to a thin liquid, like ice chips or popsicles? These foods may be used for developmental teaching or rehabilitation of chewing skills. Let's learn IDDSI's testing method to determine if a transitional food dissolves or disintegrates quickly into a puree or a liquid. This testing method could be considered a water-moistened fork pressure test, as adding water to the sample and letting it sit for 1 minute is the key difference from the rest of the fork pressure test process. The tools needed are a fork and water. Here are the steps to test transitional foods. Use a small sample, 1.5 by 1.5 centimeters of the wafer. Add 1 milliliter of water. You can use a syringe to measure your 1 milliliter. Let the water soak into the food sample for 1 minute. Then do the fork pressure test. Your thumbnail blanches white with the pressure. The sample should dissolve, disintegrate, and/or squash easily and does not return to its original shape, leaving a moist puree or paste. You may see fork marks on the sample. And transitional foods that would melt to liquids would be ice, popsicles, or ice cream. People with dysphagia should be tested individually, as some people with dry mouth may not have adequate saliva to dissolve these foods safely. It is the texture after the transition that is the most important. Make sure that the food item can be squashed and begins to dissolve with just tongue pressure and sucking on the food. In many cultures, forks and spoons are not common. IDDSI's framework and detailed definitions and testing methods documents include testing methods for around the globe. Refer to those documents for how to use chopsticks and/or fingers. These tests are used for liquidized and moderately thick, level 3, pureed and extremely thick, level 4, minced and moist, level 5, soft and bite-sized, level 6, easy to chew, level 7, and transitional foods. Here is an example of modifications for level 3. As you see, chopsticks cannot be used for this liquid texture, but finger testing is possible. The thick liquid or liquidized solid will slide smoothly through the finger and thumb, leaving a coating. Here are testing modifications for chopsticks or fingers for minced and moist. For example, the finger test with adequately moist samples will leave the fingers wet. Now we will start to answer how thick is thick. We have been talking about foods, and now we will shift to tests that mainly cover liquids. However, there will be some crossover on the fork drip test that will be covered after this flow test. The IDDSI flow test is based on a method developed in food science to test the viscosity or thickness of liquids. Today, we will talk about the flow test as it relates to each IDDSI liquid level. The tool for the IDDSI flow test is the 10 ml syringe or the newer IDDSI funnel-shaped syringe. You will also need a stopwatch. You are evaluating how fast a liquid flows through the syringe in 10 seconds. The amount left over in the syringe after 10 seconds will determine the IDDSI liquid level. Let's get into the details. A flow test is used to define IDDSI's liquid or drink levels. The IDDSI flow test was designed using tools that replicate the flow of liquids through the oral and pharyngeal cavities. See the diagram on the right to show the steps of the IDDSI flow test. First, remove the plunger and check that the syringe is in good condition. It should be clean, legible, and dry, and the nozzle should be clear and free. Hold the syringe as shown with one finger to cover the nozzle at the bottom. Pour liquid into the syringe. You can use another syringe to slowly and carefully fill your testing syringe to the 10 ml line. Next, use a stopwatch to watch for 10 seconds. Start timing right when you release the finger off the nozzle at the bottom. Let the liquid flow for 10 seconds. Stop the flow at 10 seconds and check to see what amount of liquid, if any, is left in the syringe. This will determine the IDDSI level for the fluid. Look at the flow test card on the left for measurements of slightly thick, mildly thick, moderately thick. Extremely thick liquid, level 4, cannot be tested with the flow test. Now practice the IDDSI flow test along with this video. Items needed to conduct an IDDSI flow test include 2 10 ml syringes or 1 funnel syringe and a timer. IDDSI flow testing is objective. Make sure you have the right syringe length. Not all syringes are the same. Measure from the 0 to 10 ml on the scale, 61.5 millimeters in length. I'm going to do this one again. IDDSI flow testing is objective. Make sure you have the right syringe length. Not all syringes are the same. Measure from the 0 to 10 ml on the scale. That is approximately 61.5 milliliters in length. If you are still uncertain, IDDSI compliant syringes will empty in approximately 7 seconds when filled with water. Contact material management in your respective facilities to ensure that you have the appropriate 10 ml syringes. These are examples of BD syringes that are appropriate for use with the IDDSI flow test. The lure lock or slip tip shapes are optimal. The catheter tip should not be used for flow testing. This tip is restrictive and will slow the liquid flow, potentially resulting in false IDDSI liquid level determinations. Can syringes be reused? Yes. If reusing a syringe, it must be properly cleaned, dried, and legible to ensure accuracy. IDDSI has created the new IDDSI funnel, which will be used in the same way as the 10 ml syringes we discussed. However, the top of the syringe is wider like a funnel for easy pouring of liquid into the syringe. The black markings do not wear off as easily, and it is dishwasher safe for many uses. At the time of this recording in summer of 2022, the world is awaiting more information on instructions for use and availability. Okay, I'm going to try it again here. Let's review. Here we can see this test again with levels 1 through 3. A level 1 liquid was tested on the left, and after 10 seconds there's about 2 ml remaining, and that puts it into the level 1 category. The thicker the liquid, the slower it will flow, and there will be more remaining and a higher IDDSI liquid measurement. In the middle syringe, after 10 seconds, there's about 6 ml remaining, which is within the range of IDDSI level 2. On the right, after 10 seconds of flow test measurement, we have just over 9 ml, which is in the range for IDDSI level 3. For a more in-depth learning experience, discuss these items with your group. How do your pre-thickened liquids measure up with this flow test? Best practice is to test any newly purchased products, such as supplements and pre-thickened liquids. Do you know how thick the liquid medications are that your patient receives? How is viscosity affected by temperature? For example, liquids are thicker when cold and thinnest when warm or hot. How and where should testing happen before serving? Look at the difference between cornstarch-based thickeners and xanthan gum thickeners. Which type keeps thickening over time? The answer is cornstarch. Cornstarch thickeners also thin out in response to saliva contaminating the cup, as the amylase in the saliva starts to break down the starches. Facilities should closely review their thickeners for best practice. Now let's talk about the fork drip test. The fork drip test is used to check the correct thickness and cohesiveness in levels 3 through 5 foods and levels 3 through 4 liquids by making sure that a food or liquid sample holds together on top of the tines of a fork rather than flowing through a fork. The tool required is a fork with tines that are 4 millimeters apart. This measurement is the standard size of 4-tined dinner forks. Here is an illustration of the IDDSI fork drip test for moderately thick level 3. First, scoop or draw the fork through the sample to evaluate the flow. A small amount should remain on top with no mounding, and the sample should drip slowly or in dollops or strands through the tines of a fork and not run through. The fork drip test is also used for extremely thick level 4, which is a thickened liquid that does not flow, so it is not suitable for the IDDSI flow test. Puree level 4 feels and acts similar to extremely thick level 4 in the mouth. Therefore, you can use this test on puree level 4 too. They are both smooth with no particles, do not require chewing, and must be thick enough to sit in a pile on a fork with minimal flowing through the fork. See the small tail below the fork in the photo above. Level 4 foods and drinks must also not be sticky. You already learned that the spoon tilt test is also a great way to test puree and extremely thick liquid level 4. The fork drip test is another way to also test minced and moist level 5. We want to make sure there is not too much liquid in the food. A mixed consistency with solids and liquids to handle in one bite may be too hard to control for someone with dysphagia. It is important for minced and moist to be moist and cohesive with sauce or gravy, helping the sample mound on a fork without crumbles falling off. However, the liquid should not be separating and dripping through the tines of a fork. You already learned about how the spoon tilt test is another way to make sure the food is cohesive and not crumbly and dry. Now let's review how many tests can be used within one level. This chart shows the appropriate testing methods for each consistency or level on the IDDSI framework. This would be great as a printable reference for your facility. IDDSI has also made this printable reference. You are now ready to benefit from this complex but comprehensive resource. It illustrates all texture levels and liquid consistencies, as well as testing methods with examples. This can be downloaded and printed from the IDDSI website. IDDSI has also created these audit tools for every level. They are great to test sample meal trays in the kitchen and at point of service. Go to the Resources tab on IDDSI.org's website. You can see how these forms bring together many different testing methods on one checklist. Here is an example of the audit sheet for soft and bite-sized level 6. These arrows are pointing to the critical testing characteristics for the different testing methods, such as food size requirements of 15 by 15 millimeters for adults, and the fork pressure test that defines if the food is soft enough. Here is minced and moist level 5. Arrows show the critical testing methods needed for a food item to pass at this level. The final example you see here is that of puree level 4. A puree should be smooth with no lumps, pass a spoon tilt test, but not be so liquidy as to not pass a fork drip test. You don't want a puree to drip through the fork. It should mount above the dinner fork. See the bottom where it says that the sample should not be too firm to pick it up with your fingers, as that could pose a choking risk even with puree. The IDDSI framework and descriptors are licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 4.0 license and can be used freely in your educational and training materials with appropriate attribution. We are nearing the end of our IDDSI 201 training, but know you may want to learn more about this exciting change for the people you serve who have dysphagia. Here are some additional resources you may want to explore on your own. You can visit the IDDSI website, www.idsi.org, to find diet testing method documents, presentations, and other U.S.-specific resources. The IDDSI website is your best source for the most updated information. I'm going to do that again. We are nearing the end of our IDDSI 201 training, but know you may want to learn more about this exciting change for the people you serve who have dysphagia. Here are some resources you may want to explore on your own. You can visit the IDDSI website, www.idsi.org, to find diet audit sheets, testing method documents, webinars and other presentations, and additional U.S.-specific resources. The IDDSI website is the best source for the most updated information, resources, and ideas for implementing IDDSI in your settings. All the resources can be found in the Resources tab. All IDDSI resources are free to download and use. Please visit and explore the IDDSI website to see what is available. You can also visit the IDDSI YouTube channel for additional testing content. Finally, you can download the IDDSI app to your smartphone or tablet, which has the full testing methods document and a testing videos tab with many of the training videos we saw here. The app is available for Android and iOS devices. It works anywhere without Wi-Fi or the use of data. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you have further questions, please contact the US IDDSI Reference Group, a group of dedicated volunteers at usa@idsi.org.